You ever heard the name Jennifer Schuett?
Yes.
Did you ever have occasion to come in contact with her?
Yes.
I've had 2 main goals, and they were to find the man who kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and attempted to murder me 19 years ago.
Jennifer, there was no sign of her, she was just gone.
I awoke in the arms of a strange man who I did not know. His hands covered my nose and mouth, and he calmed me down by telling me he was an undercover police officer. He told me once parked that his gun was in the back seat.
You're obviously going to have a murder case.
Many children who get abducted do not live to tell their stories, but not this kid. She was a survivor even after her attacker tried to silence her. She is none other than Jennifer Schuett, and if you don't know about her story, watch until the end to learn more about her.
Scream, but he covered my nose and mouth.
Jennifer is a survivor of a heinous crime that shook the entire nation. At the tender age of 8, she was kidnapped from her bedroom in Dickinson, Texas, and taken to a remote area where she was sexually assaulted and left for dead.
Sexually assaulted and attempted to murder me 19 years ago so that he could not hurt anyone else.
Jennifer, who was just a child at the time, had lost the ability to speak after her attacker horribly wounded her. But despite all her physical injuries and emotional traumas, Jennifer refused to let her attacker rob her of her soul and went on to solve her own case. She bravely faced her fears and testified against her attacker, finally putting an end to Dennis Earl Bradford's reign of terror. This is Jennifer Schuett's story, the girl who never gave up on herself. On August 9th, 1990, at 2:30 a.m., Ellen asked Jennifer, who was just 8 at the time, to go to sleep in her own room because she needed to wake up early the next morning. Jennifer did as she was told and went to her room and read until she fell asleep. In the morning, when Ellen came to wake Jennifer up, she couldn't find her anywhere, and her bedroom window was wide open, leading to the parking lot. After the police arrived, they decided to start the search right away. It had started to become evident to the officers that this was not just a case of runaway. As they were investigating, any clue about Jennifer could help them find her much faster. That's when the police received a call from some parents in the area. Their kids were playing in the field beside the town and tripped over something. Horrifyingly, they realized it was the body of a little girl. The next thing Ellen remembers is putting her daughter into the life flight helicopter and heading to the hospital. At this point, they knew they were running out of time. Her injuries were so severe that her survival was unlikely. Jennifer's condition was grave. Her throat had been cut from ear to ear, and she probably would have been sexually assaulted. She was in such a horrific state that they barred her mother from entering the room. You could notice how fearful she was. Fortunately, her attacker had missed all the important arteries in her neck. Soon as the news began spreading throughout the tiny town, her surgery was completed, and the doctors were able to make her airways stable. When Jennifer regained consciousness after the surgery, her behavior changed. She started to feel fear towards the male doctors in her hospital after the tragedy that had happened to her. Everyone turned out to be a suspect in her book. One weird detail at the time was her distrust of any police officers, but this fact will make much more sense once Jennifer starts to share her side of the story. At the beginning of the investigation, Jennifer wasn't able to tell the investigator anything directly. Since they had no other choice, they handed her a notebook and some pens and asked her to answer the questions in writing. As she was afraid of people unknown to her, she would write notes to her mother, and she would hand them to the officers outside. Despite being just an 8-year-old, Jennifer was considered way ahead of her time. She started to tell her side of the story, which would then unwind the stage of events. When Jennifer fell asleep, she found herself in the arms of a stranger. He was running with her down the sidewalk. Her efforts to scream were unsuccessful as her nose and mouth were covered. He whispered to her that he was a police officer and that she needed to calm down. Then they got in a car and he held her on his lap as they drove away. At this point, she knew something was wrong. She started to realize that she was getting kidnapped.
I was a very curious 8-year-old little girl and would ask a lot of questions.
Seeing Jennifer getting panicked, he pulled his car into a local elementary school and told her they would wait there till the morning for her mom to come and pick her up. After some time, the attacker got fed up with the act and started off in another place. He was smoking and drinking as well. As she began growing curious, she started to ask him many questions, which he ignored. Finally, when the car came to a stop, things took a different turn. The next thing she remembers is being dragged by her ankle, naked in the middle of a field. In order to escape from him, she acted like she was dead. The attacker then left her on top of an anthill and left her there to die. When the sun rose and the sound of children and dogs barking hit Jennifer's ears, she woke up in a state of pain and dizziness. She couldn't even scream for help. All she could feel was a lot of blood coming out from the top of her neck. But she couldn't drift off into unconsciousness as the fire ants kept biting her. At that time, she tried to recollect all of the details about the attacker as much as she could. Such a mature thing for an 8-year-old to do, isn't it? She could remember him looking greasy with a scar on his face. She remembers that his car had cans of beer and cigarettes. At one point, she came to know that his name was Dennis. A sketch artist was brought in to help her turn her memories into something the police could use, and she was asked to explain every single detail about the attacker. But this didn't help much for the local police, and they could not find anything apart from a piece of clothing of Jennifer and that man. They were starting to lose hope just when Jennifer's vocal cord, which was cut in half, began to heal. It was a miracle, as the doctors didn't think it was going to reconnect. But even then, the police were unable to get many leads. She was then discharged and carried on with her normal life. She wasn't the only one going through trauma at this time. The entire small town of Dickinson followed because the whole community was on edge. No one knew who had done this to her. The police added more staff to its department and started to position officers in schoolyards and even inside classrooms. As the years passed, the leads began to get colder and colder, and Jennifer ended up waiting 18 years with no sign of progress on her case. Then one day, she got a phone call from a police officer who gave her a bit of hope. He seemed dedicated to finding her attacker no matter what, and his simple dedication changed her life. He contacted the FBI and asked them to analyze the pieces of clothing they found in the field 18 years prior. Often working cold cases, time is your enemy. People forget, people move away, and people die. Time was a disadvantage, but they had the benefit of advances in technology in the DNA field. On September 22, 2009, Jennifer got a call from the DNA lab saying that they had got the name of the murderer as Dennis Earl Bradford from the FBI. Jennifer was 8 years old, on pain medication, and couldn't speak. And then, all these years later, for that to actually be the fact at the point, it was striking that this girl was so accurate. He was a 39-year-old man from Arkansas who had just been released from prison for another kidnapping only 6 months after Jennifer's abduction. He was arrested for attempting to sexually assault another woman in a bar 7 years after the first abduction. The man went for another woman, choked her, and pulled a knife to her throat just like he did to Jennifer. And it was from that sexual assault that his DNA was put into the national database and ultimately matched back to the evidence they submitted. They checked his profile with the sketch they made 18 years ago, and all his details, which matched perfectly with the description. It was a surreal moment for Jennifer, as she finally got what she wanted. He was charged with attempting to murder and rape a small girl and was sentenced to life in prison. How great she would have felt, 20 years to the day of the attack, and kind of just come full circle and close it out. Dennis couldn't stop his tears when he learned about Jennifer being alive during his confession. He was never brought for trial, because Dennis hung himself in a cell once he was incarcerated. At the day of the trial, Jennifer went to his grave and read out her victim impact statement. A satisfying end to 20 years of mystery and misery. That's all. Hope you liked our content. If so, then show us your support by liking, commenting, and sharing the video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with more interesting crime stories, which will leave you surprised. Until then, stay safe.